we streaming?
We are live.
Okay, good morning all, and hope everyone's well rested or well caffeinated. Either or will suffice on a Friday, but it's been a good week of board meetings. We have some work to do today before we finish our public sessions. We're going to turn back to the LCE issues paper, and then we're hopefully going to have smooth approval of project proposals for LCE and audit evidence where we didn't get any fundamental issues raised, but there were a number of comments that the working groups have addressed. Then we're gonna do my favorite thing, as Villy and Bev know, is approve the minutes. I look forward to that every week. And then we're gonna sadly say some goodbyes in public session. So, okay, we're gonna turn over to Kai.
Thank you, Tom. And as you said, we had some good discussions last night on the LCE. We got some good input that we need going forward to continue the development of the draft standard. Today, we will continue on the issues paper, and we will start with some of the topics where we need some further direction from the board. The three items that are listed on this slide are all the areas where we have included some requirements in the draft standard, but they may be more basic than if we're going the whole way. So let's start with group audits. This is an area where we had plenty of discussions. I think we may have started saying group audit should be completely scoped out. But then considering that and some of the feedback we got in a lot of jurisdictions, there may be groups consisting of really simple entities. And for regulation in that jurisdiction, they may need to provide group financial statements. So it may be very straightforward. We move to including it. Then if we are to include group audits, it's about making the line not being blurred out. So it's we can have a clear cut saying, like we've done in the draft now, that if you don't have component auditors, if you don't use component auditors, you could be in the standard. But also recognizing that you all the other factors that you're going through in order to decide if this is a less complex audit or less complex entity, you need to comply with them as well. So it's kind of the combination. So I think that's also having a clean cutoff is probably the easiest way to judge if you're in or out of the standard. And then we also had the views. The other way we could go, not having like a clear cut, could be around trying to describe what leads to complexity in a group audit. There have been views around if we have entities cross in different jurisdictions. So there's also something we could do there if we go that direction. But we do think that that may be more difficult to judge if you're in scope or not. On the other two, I think we can. It's about where you need to rely on the work of someone else. We can go back to them later. I think we can. If you turn the slide, Michelle, we can go to the first question, being question 5. And ask the board for views if they agree with the proposed approach of having a clear boundary where there are no component auditors involved in the group audit, or if we need to have further considerations on how to incorporate groups or if they should be scoped out. So back to you, Tom, for question number 5.
Okay, question number 5. Get some background. Is that fine? No echo? Okay. So question 5, not 6 though, right? Yeah. Do you want to hold off on 6? Okay.
Holding off on 6, just 5.
Takers on question 5. Isabel.
Yes, I think this question has to be clearly linked to the debate that we had on the scope of ISA 600. With the scope that was currently proposed for this meeting in the draft of ISA 600, as I mentioned at the beginning of the week, currently, as proposed, any entity having divisions or branches would fall in the scope of 600. So as I said, 95 to 99% of less complex entity would fall in the scope of group audit and be considered as a group if we apply the entrance door that was proposed. So it's difficult to answer to question 5 because I think it depends on if we have to think at the current ISA 600 scope or the future ISA 600 scope. But as I previously said, for me, this ISA for LCE, this auditing standard, sorry, for LCE should not apply, should not include considerations for group audit. Thank you.
Thank you. Kaiue.
Yeah, hello together, and it's lunchtime in Germany, but it's okay. Very briefly, I agree with the approach to have a clear boundary for group audits, auditors, audit, sorry, that means no component auditors. That's all, thanks.
Thank you. Fiona?
I would just scope out group audits altogether. I think as soon as you introduce that ISA 600, you're just going to introduce complexity. So my preference would be just to scope it out.
Thank you. Rich?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I guess I was starting that thinking, well, I like the idea that the working group came up with, but I probably personally am more in Fiona's camp. It just adds complexity. It's a whole new area that has to be covered. You know, simple, clear, you know, information we need to make it, you know, whether you're in, you're out, whether you're doing this, you're not. The comment that Isabel raised, I do think that they do overlap, and that's one of the issues. I don't think it's as big of an issue because I don't believe in the group audits we expected. Well, the word division is probably making it sound a bigger issue than it is. So I think if we clear that up, that it's not really divisions in the way that Isabel was talking about a few days ago, then I think it's not as big of a deal. But you know, I think we need to really think what's the best to get this project moving forward and people understanding what's in there. If we decide to go to a what the working group goes with, I do think we also need to address the question of whether and if the group engagement team requests a component auditor to do work, does the component auditor, can they use the LCE to audit that component? Personally, I don't think so, but there's been some different views expressed in my outreach. Thanks.
Thank you. Bob?
Yep, thanks, Tom. In our outreach, I think there's similar views to kind of where Fiona's at. I think trying to draw a line around whether or not component auditors would be used or involved is really kind of getting back to what the question that we talked about yesterday. Is it the audit is complex or the entity is complex? And I think that one would take you back to it's really something based on an audit complexity. That combined with, I think, the direction with ISA 600, where the entry into that standard is something revolving around a consolidation or an aggregation or whatever it means or will be, points to some complexity with that entity. So from a consistency perspective, I think our outreach indicated drawing a line that would say group audits would not be in, would be the way to go. Thanks.
Okay, Josephine?
Morning, everyone. Yes, I am also in a similar camp that Fiona has started, which is it is much better to scope them out altogether. Thank you.
I guess, look, there's a trend here. I find it as viscerally a compelling trend. However, what I don't understand is the scale of the amount of entities it would scope out that the reference group would perceive to be LCEs. How big an issue is this? We talked about, and remember, we're sort of even in the lower end of that spectrum that we talked about last night, which is, I think most of us are targeted in the drafting of the standard. Is it 1%? Is it 30%? Is it jurisdiction specific? Like, to me, like I really sort of find the argument compelling to scope them out, because each time you add this in, it adds complexity. But I don't know what the scale of the issue is. Sue, you raise your hand.
Yeah, thanks, Tom, because the outreach I had was mixed, but it comes back to your point about how many people it affects. Sitting in an island about to detach itself from the mainland, we have a lot of groups that may well have a small overseas subsidiary, and given that in Europe the requirement is for auditors on pretty much all entities, you will often have component auditors who are appointed through the local requirements. So the feedback there was really that by drawing a bright line, you potentially cause complications where you've not just got, you've got things like language to consider, but you have got local audit requirements. So that was where there was the more mixed feedback, and I don't think it's a huge percentage, Tom. And actually, my personal view is as we've had more discussion, this feeling of the more we overcomplicate it, the more it's going to make it harder to stick. I'm probably in the same camp as others around saying let's scope it out. But that was the background to why people were seeing it as an issue, because in areas where you've got lots of different language considerations and things like that, and local auditors already appointed, it is an effective way of dealing with a smaller and less complex group.
So could you give me I guess maybe from my standpoint, so I take that, and it's at the end of the day, we're going to sort of get cost benefit analysis. There is always a possibility for us in development at ED to ask a question about this to find out what the scale of incidence is, and if you put it in, it's really hard to take it out. But like the type of entity that is affected with that cost, are we talking even in like a 5 to 10 person entity? Are we talking hundreds of people usually?
I think it could be even in the 5 to 10 or maybe even smaller. We don't have the numbers of how many entities this would affect, but I think it's quite jurisdictional. And for Norway, for example, and Scandinavia, it could also be entities without any employees. It could be really small, and for some reasons they're structured as a group. So it's very jurisdictional. When we started this, we had it scoped out, and then we got the feedback from quite a lot of people that would then limit the use of the standard too much. And so we tried then to build it in and trying to find the bright line, and the best way we could find for now was around the use of component auditors. Because I think it's somewhat also linked to Rich's discussion. If you're saying these are really truly less complex entities, but for jurisdictional reasons they need to have group financial statements, and we're scoping them out, it would limit very much who really can use this. But I think Brendan on the working group is also one that argument for bringing it in. So maybe we could ask him to come on and explain his view on this as well.
If he's on, I'd love to hear it, and then we have some more reaction, because I think at the end of the day, we're going to have to discuss the pros and cons, the cost benefits of including it in, which clearly adds complexity. And if you want more pages to the standard, it helps with that too. Brendan, are you on?
I am indeed, Tom.
Thank you.
There was two issues really, I suppose, were driving our move to have some form of inclusion, and one of them Sue has covered. It's the idea of cross-jurisdictionally, where you may have a requirement for consolidation, and you would have a group audit that would have perhaps a very small entity. It might just be an asset-driven entity or something like that, but there may be an audit requirement there, and this would preclude it. But I think one of the more compelling arguments was the basis on which we've gone into this standard, which is looking at complexity. And the idea that just by the mere fact that it's a group audit, it is complex, was something that we didn't think, or certainly the feedback we got was that doesn't necessarily always, is not always the case. And that you could have a very simple group with a very simple issues to deal with, and therefore it wouldn't necessarily be an issue. And the mere fact that you know, if the entity is not particularly complex, the mere fact that it is a group audit doesn't necessarily drive complexity. It's all relative to the individuals and the practitioners doing the audit, that it may not necessarily be a complex thing for them to carry out that group audit. So they were kind of the key drivers for us.
Thank you, Brendan. That was very helpful. And Brendan, you give a sense on this sense of scope of, is this because when we see a large amount, are we talking, like, I get the impact of where it may fall, but are we talking like a large percentage, or is this is a relatively small percentage of LCEs? Not to say that they're not unimportant.
I don't think it's going to be a particularly big population, if we can put it that way, but I do think you are going to get degrees of concentrations. I think certainly in the feedback I was getting, there is a concern over a post-Brexit environment, and the UK and Ireland, for example, where it was felt that it could be problematical. And I think you'll have other jurisdictions where you have close trading links and where you have potentially small economies or particularly open economies that this could be problematical.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much for that. Len.
Yeah, thank you, Tom, and thank you, Brendan. It's good to hear Brendan's voice again. I started in a camp of my task force members, Rich and Bob and Josephine. The reason is when I look at the paper presented to us, the bright line approach. Also using the example component auditor is a bright line. I think we need to be very careful. 600 touches so many standards, and already we talk about the LCE standards. We're going to not scope into certain standards. That's one. Number two, you know, as part of exposure draft and also looking at some of the comments we heard from the ED, the complexity actually is not just with the use of a component auditor. It's a lot of other things. We look at shared service center, equity type investee, there's access issue. There's a number of issues that the task force is working through. So if we want to continue to explore this idea for this small number of companies, probably you know, the ISO 600 group audit task force needs to spend some time with the LCE task force to really understand you know, some of these characteristics of this type of companies, and in terms of complexity of the audits involved. I think we need to invest some time to understand all the issues. But I'm concerned with the bright line approach in dealing with the group audit. Thank you.
Thank you. Rich.
Yeah, two things. And again, sorry about coming back in, but one, Tom, you mentioned the, where are we really scoping? If you're scoping at the lower end of that 85%, this is not that applicable. The aren't going to be as many. I do take Kai's point that maybe in Scandinavian countries there could be really, really small groups, but I think that again is a big point. I keep raising it, but are we looking at the top end of the 85% of LCEs, or are we looking at the middle or bottom end? And when you get to the smaller end, this just can't be as big of an issue if you scope this out. But one other thing I forgot to say earlier is if we use this approach, you could end up with cases, because it says if you use component auditors. Well, if I wanted to use the LCE standard, wouldn't I just go ahead and say, I'm the group team, I'll do all the work? I'm no longer using component auditors, and so I'm in the standard. And again, it could still be complex, but now I've found a way to get myself into this standard. So again, I very much agree with Len that I think that probably needs to be explored more with the 600 group to make sure these things, loopholes and stuff wouldn't come through. Thanks.
Okay, Eric.
Thanks, Tom, and not really adding a lot new, but I think certainly in my outreach in Canada, there is a relatively significant proportion of these smaller entities that, for various reasons, have branches and divisions and relatively simple consolidations. But I also had the same concerns as with the bright line being the component auditor, just for the same reasons that Rich has mentioned. I'm not sure, I don't know, I haven't reached a firm conclusion at this point, but I tend to be towards the smaller end of the scale in terms of the scope of this standard. So I'm kind of with Rich on that.
Okay, I wonder, thinking about this a little bit, at Brendan's point, I with some of these jurisdictional issues and some of that, in fact, there may be quite a number, not maybe a huger number, that are on the smaller end that are kind of. It seems to me this is a pretty severable part of the standard too. Like you could consult on this pretty easily and figure out like what the cost benefit, like we could argue what the line is to be drawn and the bright line or whatever the boundary should be, but I'm not sure that we know enough yet. I know there are a lot of people who sort of inclination is to remove the complexity from the standard, but there's no reason you can't sort of think about the alternative and ask about it. And develop it a little bit better. So if you wanted to, if it really were an important part of the population and it would undermine the LCE standard even for the target population, you could ask in an explanatory memorandum about this issue. I don't know if you think the same way or think in the same way, Kai, that there's more maybe that we could develop and seek input on in relation to this to figure out how big it is, to get a better sense of the pros and cons of leaving group audit in the standard versus removing it.
We have in the draft standard, we have tried to include the requirements that we meant were necessary to, if you were following the line that we had set up. But then I think, yes, we probably should have a question on this in the explanatory memorandum, but I think also to limit, let's say, the risk. This is probably an area, since we're saying it's very jurisdictional, it's an area where each jurisdiction would the scope groups out if they want, for example, out of the standard, whereas for others it could be important to leave it in. But we could either have something, a suggestion in the standard and consult on it, or not have a suggestion there and have the question on how the views on that.
Bev?
Yeah, I was going to suggest that maybe we leave it out, because I think someone made the point that once it's in, it's really hard to get it out. But then we could have a whole section on it to explain should we include it and ask questions, and then sort of explain what the impact on the standard will be and really get the input of the stakeholders, and then we can include it if it comes back as wanting to be in there. So I think that could be a good compromise of those that don't really want it in, so we can continue to develop it without the group audits, but then we would develop a whole separate section on it in the EM itself, to try and just get some more information about whether it should be in or out.
Yeah, I raised that point. It's always hard to get things out. Rarely do standards shrink in size when you post CD. Josephine.
Yeah, apologies for interjecting, and I agree with Bev and you, Tom, and of course Kai on this, that it's probably best dealt in the EM as a question. But this is not a simple task. This is not a matter of looking at 600, assuming 600 was fixed right now. It's not a matter of looking at that and working out which requirements are relevant, because 600 is built on the ISIS. And therefore it's built on that complexity, and it's supplemental to the complexity that's in the ISIS, and it doesn't repeat the ISIS. So all of the complexity, for example, in controls, all the complexity in terms of the interaction with component auditors. So you'd actually have to rethink how to do supplemental requirements under the LCE standard. So it's not a matter of just going through and working out what's disproportionate, etc. It's a very different exercise. So that would take quite a lot of time, and therefore we would have a little bit more time if we went through the EM process as well. Thank you. Okay,
I think we have a path forward here that is responsive to the concerns that were well articulated by Brendan, and a way to get some outreach and comment on it to figure out what the scale of the issue would be and whom would be limited. But at the same time, being responsive to the board, whose inclination is to leave it out right now. It doesn't mean you stop work on the possibility for having it. I suggest the working group continue that in conjunction with the group audit task force too, because it'll have to reflect some of that thinking as well. Do we have a path forward here, Kai, from your standpoint?
Yeah, I think we then would take the requirements that we've already built into the standard, take them out, and then we would have a question in the ED on this.
Yeah. But you could also be working simultaneously. You'll have to prioritize it on what would happen, how would we do it if it were in.
Yeah, but we'll not include it in the draft standard when it goes up
in the initial draft.
Yep.
Okay, great. Should we move to question 6?
Yeah, we can move to question 6. I think this is also an area where we need some further direction and where to be completely, or where to do the scoping. It's around the use of work of auditors expert. It's really the issues behind the use of the work of the expert. It's about the complexity of the need, for example, an accounting estimate or so. It could be that you have a building and for some reason you have a valuation expert. Should you for that reason be excluded from using the standard? And we think not. So we have included some basic procedures for this in the draft, and also around the entity's use of service organization. In a lot of jurisdictions, what you see is that typically the LCEs, for example, are outsourcing payroll services. And if you are to exclude them because they use the service organization, it would be limiting the population with a huge number. And we don't see that as beneficial. So I think what we try to do on this is to define it so that it's around how you audit it. Are you able to audit it without involving the use of other auditors? Can you get to the information either in the entity itself or in this service or in the outsourced entity? So I think for that opening for views on question 6.
Great. Question 6. So.
Thanks, Kai. So I was in agreement with the service organisation piece. I think you've given some examples of simple service organisation use that doesn't make the entity in itself more complex. But I was less convinced by the auditor's expert. I think the reason you have an expert in there to start off with is because of the complexity of something that means that the auditor doesn't have the skills to be able to do that. So I would prefer to keep auditors experts out.
Isabel.
Yes, so I spoke with many practitioners involved in audits of small and less complex entities, and their point regarding to the use of the auditor's expert is that often they use actuaries as external experts, not because the formula is complex, but because to compute the accrual for the lump sum amount the people get the day they leave the entity for retirement. So it's not post-employment benefit. It's the amount you receive the day you leave for retirement. And to book that accrual, you need to use actuarial tables. And most of the practitioners do not have actuarial tables and they don't know how to use them. So it's not complex, it's not something complex, but they just don't have the formula. So they use an actuary as an expert. So they would not scope it out from the standard. And regarding the use of a service organization, I'm very much in agreement with Kai Morten. In France, almost all the small entities use a service organization to process payroll services. And so definitively it has to be. Thank you.
Thank you. Kai.
Thanks, Tom. Again, very briefly, Kai Morten, first of all, I agree with the additional of limited material on using the work of an expert. And secondly, I also agree with the addition of limited material on using a service organization. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you. Sachika?
Thank you, Tom. I also support task force's proposal, and I also, strongly support regulating service organization. I think perhaps, as also in Japan, LCEs may use service organization more frequently than non-LCE because the entity is not large enough to hold such functions within them. And I think in many cases, the auditor of LCE can obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence easily, even if the entity uses service organization. And if so, I think there is no complexity and no need to scope out them from applying the LCE standard. Thank you.
Thank you. Fiona?
You'll probably guess where I'm going to go with this. I think both of them should be scoped out. I think they should, well, maybe I should clarify that. I think they should be conditional. If you need to use an auditor's expert, then you use the IAASB. If you need to, if you're using a service organizations, then you refer to the IAASB. And I don't recall hearing a lot of feedback from the LCE community or the SMP community saying, oh, the service organization standard is too complex and we can't apply it to these small situations. They've worked out how to apply the full ISA for service organizations already. And I just think it makes it cleaner if it's a conditional thing. You've got an expert or you've got a service organization, you go to the ISAs and you work out how to apply them to that situation. And I think for a service organization in the sorts of examples you're talking about, like payroll, for example, it's not complicated to do what's required under the ISAs for the service organization. So that would be my preference, just to keep it cleaner and make it conditional on that basis. Thanks.
Fiona, I guess I have a question for you. Even if you accepted the standalone element of the standard, would you still then basically say, if this were the case, you still have to just for those instances look back to the ISAs?
Yeah, that's what I would do.
That would be, I think there's one instance or two instances in IFRS for SMEs where that occurs. I think around IAS 39. But okay, I just wanted to understand, it doesn't mean that you excluded being a standalone, but you're saying that
Correct.
in those two instances, okay, I just wanted to understand your position. I'm not agreeing, not disagreeing, but that is your position.
That's
Okay,
my
Rich.
position. Thanks.
You call me, yeah? So things are back to normal. I actually disagree with Fiona. It makes me feel a little bit more like it should be, I guess. I agree with where the task force, working group is on both the points. I guess one of the things that would concern me of not allowing is, there needs to be the tool chest of what the auditor can go look towards. And if there's a going concern issue or, something comes up, you want them to be able to get the right expertise. So I think that's the one side of it. The other side is, again, as I've said before, I really don't want the flipping back and forth, because once you start, even if you say it's only for these two things or one thing, then, someone else, a regulator, could come in and say, well, you moved back for that. That stuff is really good over here. Why didn't you think about that? And I really believe in the standalone, both for the branding and for the understanding that the LCE auditor is going to need to know. Thanks.
I guess maybe one of the things I'm thinking about is that we're looking at this question in isolation, but it sort of draws me back to the applicability question up front too. Like if we define that right, that will already indicate a pretty good universe of companies that are in a standalone LCE standard. I that's at least the thought in the back of my head. Is this, if we get the thing right, why does a specific element or use of something in the toolkit make all the difference? So Josephine and then Len.
Thank you. I am completely in agreement with Fiona on this. I think in these two instances, that is your toolbox. And if you are in that situation where you do need an expert, or there is a service organisation, then you can use those ISAs as they are. Otherwise, from my perspective, I can't see right now what you would take out of the requirements in those ISAs, which would obviously make the the draft LCE standard very complex. So I would support the Fiona approach, that it's conditional, and provided we're very clear about what's conditional and what you do in those conditions in the standard, then I don't have the same concerns that Rich expressed. Thank you.
Okay, Len?
Yeah, thank you, Tom. So my suggestion is, when you look at the body of the ISAs, you look at the 600 series. We talked about 610 yesterday, 600 this morning. Now we talk about 620. I think these three standards have some common characteristics. Individually are unique as well. So I would encourage the task force that when we reach a decision conclusion, we should look at the entire 600 series as one group. Because we need to have some consistency. You can't say scope out group auditor, but we're scoping expert. I think people challenge that. So at least think about that as you go along. Continue to think about the solution for the use of all the external parties in audit. Thank you.
Okay. I don't think we have any clear consensus on this point yet. And I'm not sure that we actually need a firm. I could take a straw poll, but I'm not sure it would be particularly necessary at this point in time to do it. I sort of think some of this stems from the original applicability issues and whether we get that right, and then whether this really is as big an impact. I don't want to discourage the working group from continuing to work on this issue, considering the diversity of viewpoints. I know Kai or Bev, if you have a reaction yet to what you've heard.
No, I think what I did here was more support than not supporting this. But there, as you said, there is also caution. So I think, Bev, do we need more direction on this, or are we okay to move forward?
You know, I think thanks very much. I think we just need to go away and think about this one as to how we do this.
Look, I think in general, we should be very tough on ourselves about what's in and what's out, right? I think the bias should be trying to keep the standard as slim as possible and added little complexities. But again, sort of going to the discussion we just had earlier, is we have to understand whether, in practical standpoint, are we scoping the types of entities out that we really want to cover? And I think the working group could go back and consider it. So sort of my inclination is to align with sort of the Fiona articulation, but I'm also aware of that if we are scoping companies out of this necessarily, or if we're adding complexity by looking back to ISAs and therefore underlining the standalone nature of this, then we may have a real problem as well. Okay.
Yeah. I think if there are no others having specific views on this, we probably can move forward to one of the next question, which is related to what some already brought up, standalone nature versus link back to the ISAs. If you remember back to the June discussions, we did get direction from the board at that point that we were to try to develop this as a standalone standard. That is what we have done as well. We've developed it as a standalone with direct references back to the ISAs, including the requirements that would be necessary within the separate standard for the circumstances of an audit of an LCE. We also think that, as some of you already pointed out, that if we were to allowing to jump back to the ISAs to get requirements, you blur out the lines between which standard you actually used, and it would be difficult to judge the compliance, also both for the auditors, but also if you're in inspection, so on, where is actually the line. And specifically also on reporting, if you used a little bit of the separate standard and some of the ISAs, how would you actually do the reporting of that in your auditor's opinion? What should be the basis for your auditor's opinion? And when we talk about the basis for the auditor's opinion, we haven't reached a conclusion of that on the working group, but at this time we think that it should be based on the separate standard and not on the ISAs. But there have also been different views, because if you're drafting this standard using the requirements of the ISAs that are applicable for the entities, you could say that you would end up doing the same audit. You would reach reasonable assurance. So why should you not be able to claim compliance with the ISAs as well? Because you could almost claim that you've only scoped out the requirements that are not applicable. So there are different views on this. So we need to get some direction on that also from the board. And I think also related to this is around a discussion we had yesterday on the standalone nature. Should the ISAs be a prerequisite? As some of you said, you need to have a prerequisite knowledge of the ISAs in order to use this standard. I think we are having difficulties understand how you actually would require that in the standard. How you would go about doing that. Should that be then a requirement saying that in order to use the standard, you need to know the ISAs, and how would you actually judge that? But we need some, that's a link to the standalone nature. So hopefully we'll get some input on that when we go into the standalone discussion. I think by that we can then move to the next slide that has the questions. I think on this we can actually do 8A and B together because they're linked. And I think they're somewhat linked. So the board's views on standalone nature and what should be the basis for the auditor's opinion.
Okay. 8A and B. Isabel.
Yes, thank you. very much supportive of having a standalone standard with no open door to use other standards, because I think if we do so, it will be very difficult to know what the auditor should or shouldn't have done. So I think I agree with Rich on that. I have maybe another option for consideration of the task force, which would be standalone, except for the reporting consideration. And that's what we have done in France when we developed our standalone standard for small entities. We wanted to keep it short. And in fact, we realized that if we had to develop everything that is currently in 700 and 705, 706 to explain when you qualify, when you have an adverse opinion, what is an emphasis of matter, what is another matter. And you may add on top of that, if it does not apply to this context in France, the key audit matter. So maybe that could be a solution to fix the debate we had yesterday on 701. Some wanted to have it in, some wanted to have it out. But if we say for the audit procedures and everything else except reporting, we apply the standalone. But for the report, you apply the ISA, maybe it's much easier to deal with. So maybe a matter for consideration. And having said that, I strongly believe that the basis for the auditor's opinion should be the standalone standard, even if we have this open door for the reporting to the ISAs. For me, it should be very clear for the reader and for all the stakeholders that only the standalone standard has been applied. I wanted also to build on what you said, Kai Morton, on what we mean by understanding of the ISAs. I think based on the discussion we had yesterday, that maybe what we mean is not being able to perform a full ISA audit, but maybe what we mean is a sufficient, a very good knowledge of the definitions that come from the ISAs, because we all agreed that these definitions should be the same for the standalone standard and for the ISAs. So all these definitions interact together. So maybe what we mean when we say that we should have a good understanding of the ISAs is that we should have a good understanding of the definitions of the ISAs and how they interact together. Thank you.
Thank you. Fiona?
Thank you. I'm supportive of a standalone standard, and therefore I think the basis for the opinion has to be on a standalone basis. To your question as well, Kai Morton, around how you would require knowledge of the ISAs, I don't think you can require it. I think it would either be linked to the scoping or essential application material, or whatever you want to call it, where you clarify that it's a standalone standard. However, it's based on concepts and principles that are embedded in the ISAs, and therefore, reference can be made to, if there's concepts or principles that they're uncertain about, they could go back to the ISAs to understand them. So I don't think you can require it though, but I think you can link it as a signpost for people to go back and understand those concepts more fully. Thank you.
Thank you. Kyle?
Thanks, Tom. As the colleagues also has mentioned, I also believe that the standard needs to be standalone if the entity is involved in complex transactions or is subject to complex events, or if complex accounting standards apply, then the full ISAs should be applied. Then my answer to little b is a very important question. It would be, in my view, inappropriate to claim compliance with the ISAs if the full set of ISAs have not been applied. Reference should be made, in my view, of the ISAs for SEE audits So in my view, the discussion on reasonable assurance does not take into account that reasonable assurance, and I have mentioned it earlier, is also a range, and that what is obtained is the assurance that the reasonable in the circumstances. What is reasonable in the circumstances is always a question of what the benefits of obtaining a different additional assurance would be compared to a cost of obtaining it. For example, for LCEs that are not listed entities, banks or insurance company, a case can be made that reasonable assurance for such LCEs needs not to be at the same level of reasonable assurance for these other entities. So in my view, consequently, to distinguish the level of assurance for audits of LCEs from audits of more complex entities, such as listed entities, banks, and insurance companies, reference could be made in the basis for opinion paragraph 2, obtaining the assurance that is reasonable in an LCE audit. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you. Yosh?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for working group. I have only one comment for matter 8 for as LCE audit. And the audit report is directly related to the public interest, as audit is meant to reduce information risk for intended users. In addition to the practitioner's viewpoint, we have to consider from the user viewpoint how the users understand and recognize the audit report and what user benefit from such audit. So it is necessary to state the audit standard used in the audit report to avoid misleading users. And the background of decision to develop the separate LCE audit standard due to the difficulty of applying the current full set ISAs to LCEs makes it necessary for LCE audit standards to function as a standalone. If so, it is inappropriate to refer to the ISAs in audit report. And of course, it is reasonable to state that the audit was conducted under the specific standards for LCEs. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Bob?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. And on item 8A, I think I'm largely in the camp of Fiona's position here. And I addressed this a little bit yesterday. I agree. I don't think we can require certainly that familiarity with the ISAs is necessary to use the standard because there would be no way to really assess whether or measure that against that requirement. However, I do continue to be concerned, and maybe it's more messaging or description or brand. I think we've talked a little bit about. I think we need to be very careful about saying the opposite perspective, which is, these standards can be used without a knowledge of the ISAs or fundamental principles, because I think I just personally am skeptical that the standard will be standalone enough to enable an auditor to perform a high quality audit absent any familiarity with the ISAs and so on and so forth. So I just think we need to be careful about how we do that. And I know we've talked about the fact that there could be implementation material, there'll be training material, there'll be guides and things like that. And I accept that, but I think the board, needs to be careful that we don't in some way put forth a standard that isn't capable of high quality application standalone. In other words, relying on others, perhaps for training, for methodology and things like that. I'm not, saying that's what we're doing. I don't think we're intending to do that, but I do see a risk of slipping in that direction. So on 8A, I think it's about messaging. And I think it was yesterday, Fernando described it well about how we're comfortable with this today. We all are. But a few years down the road, would you feel the same about this standard? So that's my basis there. On 8B, listen, I think, you know, the standard, both whether you're doing an ISO audit, full ISO audit, or an audit under the LCE standard, I do believe we can get to reasonable assurance under either one. So I fully accept that. But I do think from a transparency perspective and user perspective, there should be some description of the standards that were used by the auditor to obtain reasonable assurance. So I think they're both reasonable assurance. But I struggle a little bit to accept the fact that the LCE standard is the full ISAs with just non-applicable things omitted, because I think as we work through some of these issues, for example, we just talked about service organizations, it may not just be that things that are not applicable have been struck out, but there may actually be a different approach described in the LCE standard for dealing with those matters. So both reasonable assurance, I agree with that, but would like the transparency in the description of the standard used. Thanks.
Thank you. Eric?
Thanks, Tom. I'm very much of the same lines as Bob. I think it should be a standalone standard. I would be worried about, however, about people using the standard without familiarity with the ISAs. You know, particularly as it looks like the standard will not include a lot of application material or explanations of concepts and things like that. So I'm quite comfortable with the sort of direction that Bob was going on there. For me, on the basis for the opinion, it's really too early for me to give you a decision until we really decide where we end up on the scope of the standard. You know, as Bob said, if there are parts of it where it's basically been excluded and it probably should have been applied, then I think we would have to be in his position, which is a separate description. But it really, for me, it just depends where we end up, and it's too early for me to conclude on that at this point. Thank you.
Okay. Fernando?
Thanks, Tom. I'm in favor of the concept of a standalone standard. However, I think that in real life, in practice, that's not really going to happen. We're just going to go back to the ISAs and read all the materials that we think are necessary to support the audit or the procedures or get a better understanding. The concept is it's good, but honestly, I don't really see this happening in real life going forward. And on B, I'm not in favor of making references to the ISAs. That is just going to create confusion. It's just going to be misleading. And as Bob said, we need to be full transparent on the basis of our work. Thanks.
Look, there's a common theme that's coming up in, first of all, no one's disagreed with the standalone nature of the standard yet, but on this idea of whether you need to look back to the ISAs or know the ISAs, no one is suggesting that the ISAs somehow go away. It exists out there as a form of knowledge, regardless. The question is whether you need to be obliged to understand them in doing the standards. Personally, I find it internally inconsistent to demand one thing to be standalone and yet have to have knowledge of the other thing that we're saying is too complex for small auditors of LCEs. Like, I think there's an education requirement for the profession to be able to understand basic principles and concepts in achieving an audit. But I do think there's a difference, a separation of, do you forget that it exists? Like almost like a textbook out there that it exists in the universe and it's a basis to refer to. And some people obviously will refer to it, but that's different than saying that thou shalt understand it in its full entirety and its complexity, of which we're trying to eliminate for this universe of audits. Sue?
Thanks. So I'm also supportive of the standalone process, but I do question whether we've got there yet in the, you know, even in the early stage work we're doing, because, you know, to your point, Tom, this material at the moment, I think, is predicated on an existing knowledge and understanding of ISAs, and I think, probably like Bob, I have a concern about how this is going to look in the future, you know, maybe in 5 or 10 years time, when you don't have that accumulated knowledge built up. So I think as we're working on the standalone nature, we need to be challenging, are we assuming knowledge that's brought with, or is there more that can be done to help that? I do feel the digitalization, as we start working through that could be an opportunity to build in some helpful links and cross-references in a way that doesn't sort of undermine things or make it overly complex. And then, sorry, on B, like others, I agree. I think the transparency is really important, so I support referencing the standard that is used. Thanks.
Thank you. Rich?
Yeah, so not surprising, very much believe in the standalone. I also don't believe in the dipping in and out of the ISAs. On the knowing the ISAs, you know, to be honest, I was sitting in the camp of you really need to know it. But I've liked the discussion that's gone on, and I can see the stuff that Bob and Sue said about, you know, okay, well, what's going to be in the future, and I compare that with the approach we've taken on the essential material and the application of not putting that in there. So to me, if you truly want to do the standalone, then again, you can't have that assumed knowledge. Yes, the ISAs will be there, but you know, we're trying to say this is standalone, and you can do an audit understanding what's in the separate standalone document. And so I think you can't go a little bit here, a little bit there. You either go with standalone, which I agree with, and then you need to bring more. I'm not saying you need to go all the way on the application material, but because these are simple, so you can just bring the stuff that relates to, you know, a simple audit. But I don't like the idea of going both ways. On the opinion, clearly, I'm very much in the say LCE standard transparency. It's also good for and appropriate for our branding on the ISAs and the branding of the LCE standard to be very clear what we're saying, and to be able to get to reasonable assurance. You know, I think we're too early because we need to know where we end up on which parts of the requirements are not going to come in and which ones are, and then when you look at it wholly. So I think that's just something as you progress and as you do the mapping, you know, come back and then look, can you get to that reasonable assurance? Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Rich. Jim?
I was just reflecting on some of the CAG discussions, and I think if you're going to have this as a separate standalone, then you do not want to bring in all the ISAs, because that's you're ultimately going to have two very similar if you start pulling in bits and pieces or referencing. And I think the CAG was supportive of that true standalone concept.
Okay, those are the last of the hands here. So I think you got a strong majority on the standalone nature of the standard. I see for the most part, people would want this to be clearly branded, and in any basis for auditor's opinion, branded as such, so it doesn't cause confusion to users of the reported information. Though there were different flavors of that and a little bit of wait and see of what exactly the auditor's opinion says. On the knowledge of ISAs, there were some mixed views, but I think a little bit the majority was, even for people who came into the discussion, who think you should have had some knowledge of it, was the maybe inconsistency about demand and knowledge when you have a standalone nature, but I'm not sure it was entirely resolved. I don't necessarily need it was fully resolved. I gave a pretty strong view on my view, and I think others gave their own views too. So you can take that back to the committee. But I do find it a little bit internally inconsistent if you have a standalone state. The ISIS still exists though. It's like you people will naturally go to that, just like when I need a economics question answered, I go back to my economics textbook. So I know where it's a point of reference. So with that, I turn it back to you, Kai, to get your reflections on what you just heard.
Thank you. I think, as you said, we got clear direction on the standalone nature. Also, mostly on the basis for auditor opinion, they go in line with that. So I think we have good direction in order to move forward on both of those. And on ISAs being prerequisite or not, I think you had a good comment there saying the ISAs would still exist. And as Fiona said, you could refer to them to further understand the concepts and so on. But you could use part of that to understand some of it. I think also the reason why we're requiring the ISAs today, that's because that's the knowledge that the users have now, but they could also use, as you said, Tom, they could use any other standards or other material as well to understand the concepts if they're the basic concepts. So we would not disregard the existence of the ISAs, but not then requiring the prerequisite knowledge, as we had some discussion around yesterday. I think then we can move to the next question, would probably be the last one for today. We've now gone through some of the overarching concepts and so on. We will also need some detailed feedback on some of the content in the standard. I don't think we will have time to walk through all the parts now. But there are a few that are listed on this slide that we want some direct feedback on, where we, if we have the right requirements in or not, are we moving in the right direction, or if we need to include more requirements, what should that actually be? If you have additional comments on some of the other parts that we have not been discussing on this call, please send them through an email to me and Bev, and then we will take that forward with the working group as well. So then we want then, based on the discussion we also had earlier on the applicability, we want some direct feedback on if we've met the right level of requirements on estimates and also around fraud. We tried to include what we would think would be relevant for an LCE, considering the applicability. So some feedback on this would help our direction. Anything specific you want to add to that, Bev?
Okay, we're going to finish up with question 9. That means question 10, any feedback you have on 10, send it directly to the working group. So comments on question 9. Josephine.
Thank you. As you probably remember from the discussion about the project proposal, my main concern is ISA 220. I was actually quite alarmed by the number of requirements that were stripped from 220 when I was looking at the draft standard. To me, I see the quality management of the engagement as being the same, whether you're a tiny or big, no, I shouldn't say tiny or big, because we're a less complex entity or a complex entity, assuming, of course, there's more than one person in the audit, and we already have a proportionality caveat for that in our current 220. Items such as managing or thinking about the behavior of the team. I'm not quite sure why that's not as important for an LCE audit as it is for non-complex audit. I think behaviors and skepticism and tone and quality culture are just as important. Direction, supervision and review, they're critical and they're part of audit evidence as well, as we discussed in the audit evidence section. And from that respect, I went through each of them and I could not understand why they had been deleted at all. Admittedly, you haven't explained the proportionality piece, but again, as I say, for me, quality management is the same. And equally, we've said that this ISA is premised on this standard, can't help myself, this standard is premised on ISO QM1. ISO 220 is a funnel and helps those QM1 aspects operate at the engagement level. So I'm not quite sure how we can premise it on ISO QM1, which I agree with, by the way, and then not have the follow-up in the actual 220 piece. And then some of the alterations that were made were somewhat peculiar to me. One simple example is, and I'm trying not to be disrespectful, but one simple example is the assembly of the audit file where the auditor shouldn't delete or discard, and that was changed to move. And that's a completely different thing altogether. So first off, I think all of those requirements should be in. Quality management stands alone from the other aspects of the standards. And secondly, I don't think they should be altered in any way at all. And the third aspect is that when we got responses to that consultation, this was one area where we got a lot of support from that community that they were proportionate to the smaller end. And so for that reason, I'm disappointed to see so much stripped out. 540, that one's difficult because it depends again on where we land on the scope, and it would be the same for other standards. But given I've taken so much time about 220, I'll stop there for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Josephine. It seems to me that as the working group continues its drafting, those are things that could all be addressed and finding the right level of detail. So it's not a question of principle, it's a question of execution, it sounds like, for 220 in your mind, albeit some significant issues in your mind too about how it's executed. Rich?
So for 220, I'm exactly in the same camp as Josephine, so I won't say anything more. She was very good at explaining why there are issues there. But more broadly, I have to say, as the issues paper said, we weren't going to go in detail. I did not go in detail other than, look at, a little bit here and there and the broader things. So I can't really give any more, especially just, again, as Josephine said, until we work out the scope, it's kind of hard to know whether you really have matched that. So I think the scoping question really has to get done where you can really look at detail, but I assume this will be get done in the next meetings. Thanks.
Thanks, Rich. Welcome, Imran. You're up.
Thank you and good afternoon, everybody. I want to add my word of support to the detailed comment that Josephine made in respect of this question. Two additional remarks, one on the discussion that supports the ISA 315 conversation. I really didn't totally follow why, what would justify the position the task force took about the control environment one would likely find in an LCE. It presupposes that LCEs have to have less controls. And I didn't think that was an automatic conclusion to draw about an LCE. I think many LCEs could be entirely better controlled than large, complex businesses. So to assume that they may not have control components or aspects of the control environment, it lowers the threshold for accountability a lot, which isn't one of the objectives of our project. On the other hand, I may just be misunderstanding the way the issues paper has teed this up, and happy to reconsider it the next time we talk about it. And similarly, in paragraph 29, the idea that somehow a less complex entity business won't have a great, beautiful system through which everything can happen digitally isn't a logical conclusion I'm making. I can imagine that there are small and or less complex businesses that may work quite beautifully with the system, and that we can actually audit through the system and don't have to go around it. So I was not seeing, as the task force seems to see, the correlation that if you're LCE, therefore you can't have a great control environment, or therefore you can't have a great IT system. So for some consideration of the task force, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Len?
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Not surprisingly, I'm agreeing with Josephine. We're both on the ISA 220 task force, so agree with everything she said. Just want to supplement one additional point. As we look at the group audit, as you know, 600, the linkage between 600 and 220. I think Josephine might have raised it earlier. If we do want to explore 600 in LCE, we need to make sure we get the right requirements into LCE as well. So it's not just looking at 220 standalone, which I agree with Josephine, everything she said, but also what we take out and what we bring in, also impacting the 600 discussion as well. Thank you.
Okay. So I'll turn it back to Kai. I think we have some thought to do, particularly on 220 on it. You may want to give some perspective on Imran's point. I don't think the way Imran, I read it, is not that you can have those systems, but it's all likelihood you won't, based upon the target population we're hitting, and some will be sophisticated and have it, and a large majority won't. And so sort of calibrating where the right place to hit in terms of requirements here is the real issue. I'm sure Brendan and the reference group will have some reaction to that, but I think that's the thing that the working group, or maybe soon to be called task force, will have to deal with. Kai, back to you.
Yeah, thank you. I think on the 315, Imran, I think we are requiring understanding of the control environment, and all the pieces are there, but it's rewritten in a order, so we can take that in the next round. So we're including all the components. As you said, the indicator or the factors up front, it's indicative of complexity. So it's not saying that you need to be in this way, but that could be an indicator of a complexity of the audit. So that's scoping. So it's not as a direct factor. Bev, do we need further direction on any of this, or you think we're good for now? Yep.
Yeah, nothing more. But if somebody does have any comments on individual sections, then to send them through, because that is helpful at this point. And obviously you'll see more about all of this as we continue to work through the draft.
Well, let me just say what a great discussion we've had over the last couple of days. Josephine, I see your hand popped up.
I'm really sorry. I'm having problems today actually getting my raised hand to work, and so I'm coming late. I just wanted to interject again, apologies, that to reiterate the point I made yesterday about when you're going through the mapping and making the changes. See, at this time, I don't want to send you my comments because I don't think that mapping exercise has been completed, because we're not, it's not being explained why alterations have been made, why a requirement has come out, other than obviously when they're conditional. And it's not just a matter of, well, it's not relevant in an LCE audit. We need to understand what aspect of an LCE audit makes that requirement not relevant. So taking a simple example, remaining alert for events and conditions and going concern, that was deleted, and I don't understand why that isn't relevant in an LCE audit. And that's the piece where I think there's no point really sending notes until I have that better understanding. So I just wanted to make that point. Thank you.
So Josephine, my guess is that there's been so much work done in so little time that some of it may have been a time crunch here. But let the team think about what the appropriate response is to you. But of course, they've been, as you can see, the sheer fact that we could have the conversation is that they're working around the clock, taking advantage of time zones. And so getting that balance right and trying to get the papers ready for discussion probably is more than anything else the biggest consideration now.
No, that's absolutely, that's right. And this is not at all a criticism. I'm overwhelmed by the amount of work that's been done. But there's no, I just don't want to send comments that are going to be dealt with by the task force by their mapping exercise. That's all.
Yes. Okay. That's great. Anything more you'd like, Bev or Kai? I see Imran's being joined by his standard setting expert. I'm not sure we have a standard for that yet.
Hello, Uncle Tom.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good.
That's great. Ready for the weekend, right? Okay.
Holidays.
Yeah. Okay, team. We're really in good shape. Kai, Bev, you happy with where we are?
Yeah, and just thank everyone for the comments that they shared so far on last night and today on the standard. And as I said, we want more detailed feedback if you have that. So very happy to receive more detailed feedback what you've done. So looking forward to receiving some of that. We already received some comments more detailed, but we want. The more we get, the easier it will be for us to move forward in the right direction. And again, a great thanks to the working group for all the efforts that's been done to prepare for this meeting and the work with the standard. And I think we should applaud Beverly again for all the work that she's done on this, because without her efforts on this standard, we would not be in the position to have the discussions that we're currently having. So thanks, Bev, for all the hard work that you put into this and all the long hours we had on the preparing for this. So thanks.
Thanks, Bev. Then Kalina as well, and the whole working group. Roger.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Look, I thought it was a great discussion being a member of the working group. Just coming back on the comment by Josephine, that mapping exercise is a huge exercise, which takes a whole lot of resources. You know, we've done pretty well to get it to the stage it is. It would be much beneficial if we were able to map the areas which were mostly contentious. So if we can identify the areas which are contentious, that would aid us to concentrate. You know, so we've heard 220 today, for example, so we can map those areas and look at those. But it does distract us away a little bit from doing other work if we have to concentrate too much on the mapping. So if people can lead us through as to areas they think are contentious, that would be and give Bev that feedback, that would be very beneficial in concentrating our attention and the resources around it.
Okay, Josephine.
Thanks, Roger. I just, I do understand this is a lot of work, and I totally understand that, and I'm not denying that. But as you're making changes to it, it's rather like when we're going through an exposure period and we're making changes to standards, we explain to whom we are responding to when we've made changes and in what respect. And clearly an exercise has been done to do that already. And then all the alterations that have been made, somebody made a point that, well, this won't work because when it's this particular situation, then it doesn't make any sense. And that work, essentially, if you can document that as you're going along, then it saves 30 or however many other members of the board and technical advisor left who weren't in that conversation, not having to guess that themselves or try and work out that information themselves. And other than when it's conditional, it's not clear. It really isn't. I can try and make it up, but I don't want to do that. I want to understand, and our stakeholders will want to understand, why we have decided a requirement is disproportionate in an LCE situation, or why it's been modified in that situation. So I understand it's a lot of work. If you need help with it, then let's see what we can do there. But I don't think we can just say, well, all these, because otherwise I'm going to send in all of them. That's absolutely no good to you whatsoever. That's not what you need. So I do think it needs to be done. I'm sorry.
Okay. As I said, the best way for us to do it is for us to have a think about the right response and let's say, the most proportionate response to your comments based upon our limited resources right now. So I'm gonna bring this close. Just before we do close on this matter, I don't know if Karen, on behalf of the PIOB, wants to share any of her thoughts on the discussion related to LCE.
Thanks, Tom. No, I don't have anything to add. I think the PIOB is very much looking forward to the advancement of this project, but I have to say you guys had a very thorough discussion on this item, so I look forward to the next draft. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Karen. And Jim, on behalf of CAG.
Thanks, Tom. I appreciate the discussion, and I think it's pretty consistent with the CAG discussion, so thank you.
Okay. I think in terms of the issues paper, we've made huge progress. Tremendous work, team, for all you've accomplished in that time. Hopefully your frustrations in the drafting process haven't been taken out on the snowman, Bev. We hope for his reemergence at some point. And we're going to take a break. We're not done with LCE yet. We're looking forward to having discussed LCE so much, a smooth approval of the project proposal after the break. We're going to take a break, 12-minute break. We'll reconvene at 7:40 my time, or 20 minutes to the hour. I'll see you shortly. Thank you, and look forward to the conclusion of our public meetings next.
It's like being in an actual meeting. The three of us on the screen have got our blankets on. Just like old times. Oh, and Fiona too, look.
Yeah, it's not particularly tropical tonight for some reason. So,
no.
And
that
you wear the big chunky sweater, so it feels like you got a blanket.
Yeah.
We're all sitting down the far end of the big boardroom.
We are.
In that
That's
cold
right.
spot.
Under the
yeah, we should warn the new members. Actually, no, let's not warn the new members.
No, let's just put them at that end.
Yeah, I think
that's your initiation.
Yeah, get a spot right under the air conditioner at their first meeting.
As you get more experienced, you move up around the sun.
Yeah, it's a newbie requirement. Bring your hat and gloves as well, because it's
yeah. So Josephine, does that mean we've done it virtually? So
yeah,
we
we have.
down the site now, can't we?
That's right. We don't have to sit that in now.
Yeah.
You're grandfathered.
Yeah.
I think you should actually be the one sitting there, because it's cozy and reminding you of home, since you have the same at home, sitting in the blankets. It's the one reminding you that you're home. So you should be the one volunteering to sit at camp.
No, I think I did it once and that was enough. We all had our time.
Yeah. It does feel strange though to take a woolen wrap with you to a meeting in the middle of summer when you go outside and it's super hot and humid, and then you come inside and you freeze to death.
Again.
Yeah. I remember sitting there with my scarf on, and Arno was like, "Are you cold?" I'm like, "Yes." What was your first clue?
I remember Ahava once had it over her head like this because she was.
I was just going to say, yeah, you should have had somebody sitting beside you that had their head covered.
Yeah.
Yep. I think there's a photo of that somewhere.
Okay. I hope everyone is refreshed, ready to take us down the home stretch right now for these public sessions. So, Kai, if you've caught your breath, we're back to you to approve the project proposal.
Yep. It looks like we have an issue on the displaying the slides. But I think,
briefly, I was disconnected briefly. I'm trying to reline everything back up.
Okay, well, I think I'll just start without them. We did get some feedback from the first round, and we tried to do some changes. We will go through them afterwards, but then some of the areas where we did not do any major changes was listed on the slide that you don't see. Prerequisite knowledge, I think we discussed that more today. So, and also then on reasonable assurance, we did some changes to soften the language about the expected output and not predetermined. But we also didn't do a change as the reasonable assurance outcome was is what was ordered in a way through the discussion paper. We still have the view that we're developing an alternative to the ISA to be used if it's applicable. So it's still included in the project proposal that it's a choice. We have changed the wording a little bit, as you may see further on. We also got some feedback on more direct alliance with the pain points from the consultation. We looked back at that, and I think we have included all of them. They may not be in one section, but they're spread out a little bit. We are discussing them. The ones that we are not discussing directly are the ones that we got the issues on specific ISAs in the discussion paper. Some of that probably will relate more to the the CUSP work stream than us directly. On the application material, we got feedback on negative requirements from Cayuba. That is something that we will look back to make sure that the negative requirements that are in the application material, we will make sure that we cover them off. Also some feedback, I guess, in both directions on the timeline. Some thinking it's too ambitious, and some that want a shorter period of time between the ED and the finalization. It's been left as it was in the original. Yes, it is an ambitious timeline, but we still think we can get there, given the path that we've outlined. Yes, I think by that we should start by going through the changes. Bev, do you want to share your screen and go through the changes that we have? Because we have done some changes between the version that you got and the version that we have now.
Armand, can you take your slides down, please?
Yeah, this is not all the changes. This is just things that you will not have seen because of some last minute late entry suggestions.
So Kai, did you want to just run through the more broad comments and then we can run through the individual sections?
Yeah, I think I talked to some of the broad comments right now. If there's anything additional you
Yeah, I think you spoke to the ones that we haven't really changed. I think just broadly, and you've obviously all read the paper now, I think what we have changed, we've changed things around. I think in a lot of cases, we've softened the language where we were sort of direct and said, we will do this, we will do that. There's various places that we did soften it. There were a couple of areas where we have added some additional paragraphs, and I think those paragraphs are particularly in the sort of the impact section. We do have some additional changes on some of those paragraphs. I think we had a couple of clumsy sentences, but we'll talk you through as we go through the sort of the paper. But I think broadly those were the changes that we made from the comments that we received on Monday.
So I think by that we will go through this in the same order as we did on Monday. Then start by part 1 and part 2, if there is any additional things on that. So if you want to share the comments or share the changes that we've done to part 1 and 2, Bev.
There's nothing in part 1 and 2 additional that we've done, so it's as you've got.
Yeah, so there is nothing special there then. Part 3, how the project serves the public interest. Paragraphs 13 to 17.
Okay, so in this section, I'll just, we've got on the screen so you can see the additional changes. Obviously, there was a little bit of a hangover in the one heading, so we've deleted that. In paragraph 15B.
Could I have a favor? This is a small thing. If you go down to the right-hand corner of your Word where you could zoom a little bit, at least it may make it a little easier for us to see some of the text. Okay. So just where it goes down, yeah, that better. Yes.
So I think in paragraph B, there were some concerns that were raised about that these changes will result in a more appropriate, robust risk assessment and be more effective. Obviously, that's then suggesting maybe that we're not doing that today. So we've made some changes here to remove the 2 mores. And so it's to result in an appropriate, robust risk identification and is effective in the circumstances. So we've made that change. In C of that same paragraph, it was thought that we don't need, in light of the changing public interest needs, we removed that. We didn't think it added too much more in that section. I just want to double check that I don't have any notes that we haven't done. No, because there's a couple of things that people raised we've not made changes, so I'll just talk about why we've not made changes as well. So I think for that section, that's all we have. So any comments from the board on any of these new changes or the original changes that you've seen in your document?
Okay, we're going to take comments
on part 3.
On part 3. Josephine?
Sorry, yes. So in C, the additional language that we added there, this may also indirectly help users. I thought that I wasn't quite sure why we have put that there. I thought we'd already dealt with that in maintaining confidence in financial reporting of LCEs. I thought it was a bit confusing to have it there.
So we'd added that to respond to some comments from Monday where in this paragraph it had been highlighted that it's not just auditors that it's the stakeholders' needs. To be honest, we actually really did struggle with trying to sort of articulate what the benefit to the users would be in this paragraph. So if we want to take it out, then we just need to make sure that everybody's comfortable with that.
I mean, if others are comfortable with it, I just think it's in the wrong place. I think it should be under A, because it's about maintaining confidence in financial reporting. But yeah, I'm sorry, it's not that big a deal. I just wanted to raise it. Thank you.
Your last parenthetical sort of leads me to it. If anyone felt it was that big a deal, then we could change it. Otherwise, I think maybe just leave it as is. Does anyone feel strongly on that point? Okay. Rich?
So we raised this, I'm not sure who else, maybe Josephine, but I just don't think it fits there. I just would delete it. I don't think we need to move it.
Any of you, Bev?
Maybe let's delete it because we did struggle with actually finding wording for this. So I'm happy to delete it.
Are people happy for the deletion? Fewer words rather than more words is always a good idea. Okay.
Okay.
I think then, I'm sorry.
There you go.
Moving on to the next section. Yeah, go ahead, Bev. I think the comments that we're looking for now, as you just said, Tom, is also comments that are of fatal flaw nature, not just wording suggestions and changes.
So on the project objectives, there's a couple that we didn't do. I'll come back to those. The only thing that we've done here is at the end in paragraph 19, and that's we've deleted the where appropriate. It wasn't thought that that was needed for that. There were some questions on this section though. We've added further on something around the transition. There was a comment back as to why that wasn't added to this section because they thought that it would be more appropriate to actually have in this section. This is the objective section. I'm not sure we really want to make the transition an objective. So we haven't added it here. It is in the project proposal. We will deal with it. We think it's in the appropriate place, so we haven't moved it. And then the other one is this one that I'm just going to highlight, the 1, 2, 3, 4, the 5th bullet point. I think we've reworded it. I think there were a lot of comments on Monday around what we actually meant. I think there's we originally put it in because people felt really strongly about it. Obviously, we didn't have the wording right. There has been 1 or 2 suggestions to delete this and not really sure it adds much. We thought because we've added it for certain, to really explain that proportionality, we didn't think we wanted to delete it, so we haven't deleted it. So any comments on section 5 on project objectives?
Rich?
Yeah, and so you would have seen the comment, Bev, but 19, the second bullet point, you know, the way it's worded, I'm just not sure we can say that. How do we know it's going to be used? You know, I've gotten feedback, you know, from a major territory that says the way the direction this is going, we're not going to take it on. And I understand trying to get something in, and again, we already have something that's worded a little better in 23A. So especially the second bullet point, but I'm not even sure, you know, the first, but the second one really, I just don't think it makes sense.
I think
Isn't the word endeavor the key there? We're trying.
It will be. We don't know it's going to be.
Yeah, I think this was to respond to the PIB comments of it can and will be used. And I think it's exactly the point that you're saying, Rich, is that if we go through all of this work and then people don't use it, then what's the purpose of it? So that's why we've got the word endeavor too, to try and say that we're going to try and do something that people will actually use. We've got the reference group that's helping us with that process. So I think that's why we've got it in this section. Of the public interest issues. It's pointless us developing it if it's not going to be used. I mean, we can't say definitively whether it will or not, but we will try and develop something that people will use.
Okay. Eric?
Thanks, Tom. And I'm going back to the bullet in paragraph 18. And, you know, it's not a hill to die on for me. I just don't understand what it's saying. So if you could tell me what it means, I'll be able to explain it to other people that are asking. I just don't know what it means.
I think that this bullet is really around it's that whole mapping exercise that we've just been talking about, that we have all of the requirements in the ISAs. What we've brought across are those that are proportionate to an LCE audit. So, and that is what will be in the public interest.
Okay. Eric,
okay.
Any reaction? Okay. Josephine?
To Rich's point, I think that those bullets in 19 are rather worrying. I think to Bev's point though, we're responding to our stakeholder needs and our stakeholder requests. That's how the standard will be used. So it's implicit in that point. And I think endeavoring to develop a standard that will be used, it doesn't seem to really make any sense or add anything. We're already responding to our stakeholder needs. Those stakeholders individually have said, we need a standard that looks like this, and we're working on it. So I think your color, and I don't think your 19 and 19 might be misinterpreted to mean something else altogether. So I think you're covered from the PIOB's point. And then to Eric's point, I didn't raise it when we talked about this, but I felt that we had met that particular bullet by talking about meeting the public interest needs, which is all your paragraphs before. So I think there's a difference between a proportionality test when you're going requirement by requirement, but in talking about proportionate to the public interest, that doesn't make any sense. It's about responding to the public interest, and we have that already. So I would support deleting that. And I think that would help Eric as well, because it's not dealing with those individual requirements, and I think we've covered it.
Reactions, Kai, Bev?
I'm happy, to be honest. This one, I thought Josephine would be the one that if we took it out would have an issue. So happy to take this bullet point out if everyone's comfortable with that. It's been a problematic one. If you think we're not going to lose too much, then we can remove that bullet. And I think on 19 we were trying to just respond to the PIB point. So again, if we need to take that out, if everybody thinks we're well covered in some of the other bullet points, then also we can take that out.
We have Karen on the line. Not cause any objection. The sheer fact that we're doing this standard, we're obviously not doing a standard that no one will use.
Yes, true, but you know there have been comments that if certain things happen, it won't be used, and that's the concern, that the board puts a lot of work and energy into this work, and then it results in very little take up. So that's the worry. That
Is
the
another
PIOB
way
is.
Is another way to say it, in developing the standard, the IAASB will be particularly mindful to the specific needs of stakeholders who've requested the creation of an LCE standard,
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah, that can work. That can work.
Is Bev, what do you think of that?
That's fine.
Okay, then we have a nice short sentence, not 19. We don't need to have the bullets as stated, and then we just reflect that, of course, that we're gonna solve the needs of stakeholders. Okay, next.
So we're going to delete this bullet point,
Yes.
and then we'll use the revised wording for 19.
Yes.
Okay. On the project scope, we had made a change earlier in the week, which is the version that you saw, where we changed how we describe the wide range of circumstances, and we called it a wide range of entities. People came back to say, well, it's not really, because it's LCEs. It's really the LCEs with a wide range of circumstances. So we flipped back to what we have. There's a little typo in C1, and then are based on the core requirements in 20C little 3. I think somebody came back to say that it kind of suggested that we've got some core requirements sort of spelt out in the ISAs, which are not that at all. So we've sort of flipped that just to say that that are considered core to an audit. And then in 21, this back part of the sentence, again, we've moved that sentence around a little bit. They didn't think it added anything, so we've deleted the back part of 21. And that's what we have on that section. I just want to check if we have any, we had some additional comments that we haven't changed. No, nothing else on that section. So those are the additional changes, including what you've seen. So any comments on section 6?
Any comment? I don't see any hands, so I think you're good there.
Okay, section 7, outline of the project. In 23A, it was just a bit clunky, so we've fixed that. In B, if you read it with the lead-in, explore how best to, it really didn't make much sense using the seek to, so we've removed that. There's a little typo in C. In 24, it wasn't clear what they were, so it's those entities that we've made that change. In 25, again, a bit of a clunky sentence, so we've just, I don't think we've changed the meaning there, we've just refined the sentence a little bit. And then 26, again, in this one, there was somebody that came back, and it's this what, there's a what there and there's a what here. And they said it's not really clear what the what's mean. So the changes in this paragraph are really to explain what we're talking about. So it's sort of just further explaining the what's. In 27, this was a clunky sentence, and somebody gave some really good wording, I think, to just refine the sentence. So we put some changes through. Again, not really changing the meaning, but I think it just reads much better now. And 29, it's the last one, I'll stop after this one, is again, this was one of the new sections that we'd added, a little bit clunky in some places, so I'll just give you 2 minutes. Or we've just really refined some of the language around how we're trying to describe the transition process. I think there were some concerns raised by maybe more than one on 29B, is that do you really want to have that in here? I think we have some members of the task force who think we do need to address that, because you may go through quite a long portion of the audit, and at a much later stage than say where we've got the stand back, you really do see that perhaps the LCE standard wasn't the one that was appropriate. Then what impact do you do? You've always got the opportunity to transition back, but if you're really late in the audit, do you want to do that? Because that could be a real lot of work. So I think we just wanted to sort of explore whether we need something in to explain what you do later in the audit if you do find it's not appropriate, because obviously it would impact the audit evidence you have and may impact your auditor's report, but perhaps some of the softer wording may be better. So I'll just give you a minute to read the writing for or the changes in 29A and B, because I think they're important. Okay, so those were the additional. I think this was the section with probably the most change. There may be a couple small ones coming, but these were the most of the changes that came in yesterday. So any comments on this section up to paragraph 29?
Okay, we have a few hands up, Josephine.
Thank you. There's probably won't be surprised here that 29B is the one that slightly worries me. If we have come into a situation where the majority of the audit has been completed under the draft standard, but in fact the auditors decided that actually that wasn't appropriate, should have been operating under the ISIS, that to me says deficient audit. We have no way of reporting even today where the audit has been deficient. Yes, if there hasn't been sufficient appropriate audit evidence in respect of the entity, yes, we can have modified opinions, but we don't have that ability today to report a deficient audit in our audit reports, and nor do I think we should be encouraging that. So I think that 29A is important, but I think going down a path where there's an opportunity to report that you should have been in a different standard to me is really alarming. And I know I'm simplifying it, but that to me, as I say, is highly problematic. So I think that should be deleted. Thank you.
Eric?
Can we just go back up to 27? There was, no, 26. The IAASB will explore how best to describe the circumstances that would drive complexity and therefore give an idea. I just find that, what are we trying to say there? Giving we don't normally give ideas.
Well, it's just really to say what the requirements or topics, because what you don't want is somebody going into the standard if it's not got what they want. So if you've got some other words, then that will be helpful. Thank you.
Okay, I'll get back to you on that. That's the first time I've seen them, so I didn't know. And then I think down on 29, I think you had continue to use twice in A.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. Isabel?
Yes, my point relates also to 29, and like Josephine, I was surprised by 29B, because if we all agree that it's a standalone standard, so it's quite strange that we could give the feeling that we have a mixed report saying up to some point we applied the standalone and then we applied the full ISA. So maybe that's something we will consider at some point, but I think at this stage it's too much granular to include that in the project proposal in such a detail. Thank you.
Okay, Rich?
Yeah, two things. One, on 29B, first, I'll own up to it. Those were our words that you used, Bev. So I do note that. But hearing what Josephine and Isabel said, and just thinking about it, maybe it's best to take it out, or maybe if you even make it a little bit more, exploring the reporting consequences if instead of not, because then it's not saying I have a chance to get there. My problem is I think most would think you're not going to be able to do the reporting, so maybe it's best to take it out. The other is 23B, I think it is. Sorry, I could go to my version. It's the one on the cusp.
Yes, sorry, and yeah, it's 23B, and you had raised a point on this one that you questioned whether we should have it in here in the timing. I think, sorry, and I should have explained this. The timing of CUSP is meant to coincide with this. I mean, the whole idea of the CUSP project is that it gets completed before we finalize the standard. So at the moment, the timelines are that we will do our exposure draft in June. Obviously, the CUSP won't have exposed anything at that point, but they'll be quite far advanced in where they are. So where it's appropriate, we can take on what we can from some of those drafting guidelines and principles. They are due to put out their consultation during the period that this LCE standard will be out. They will come back at roughly the same time, and they will finalize CASP before we finalize the standard. So I think this paragraph is okay, because it's the timing at the moment is meant to coincide.
Okay, so I didn't realize that you would expect to be able to expose and get comments back from CUSP in time. So if that's the case, but then you might just want to consider, because that's assuming that all works, and what happens if that doesn't work and you get the pressure on the stand. So you might just consider whether there's a, if the timing works or something.
Well, maybe what we can do, Rich, is just add a footnote to kind of explain a little bit of what I've said now, just how the timing's sort of at the moment we're targeting that they will be out at the same time, etc. If we add a footnote, will that help? Okay.
Imran.
I want to just add a word of support to the comment that Josephine made, please. Thank you.
Is that related to 29B, Imran?
Yes, it's related to the comment in 29B. Thank you.
How important for the task force working group is it to have 29B in?
I think, as Bev said, this was a view from one of the working group members. Brandon strongly wanted to include this, and I think if he wants to, he can also then do some further explaining where his thinking is on this. So I know he's online and ready to respond to that. So I think we should allow Brendan to comment on that. You ready, Brendan?
Yep. It wasn't intended to address a deficient audit in quite the way that Josephine set out, but I can see how it might be considered that way. What we had done is put in a stand back, and the concern is that what if, as we move further through and get to a very advanced stage in the audit, and for whatever reason, it then becomes apparent that we shouldn't be in this standard. And given that we're talking about LCEs, will it be practical to effectively go back to the start and do an audit in the context of full ISAs? Or do we have to consider how, if those circumstances arise, that would impact on our report? And that's really the point. So I'm not sure whether it actually needs to be in the project proposal, but it's something that we need to consider at some point.
If I haven't heard that, in truth, the reality is it really should be exploring if there were circumstances when an auditor, if the majority, it has to be about if we think that those circumstances arise, and what you would do if we determine that they should arise. But I'm not sure that needs an actual thing in the project proposal. We will almost certainly address it specifically as it relates to the stand back provisions, right? And the consequences. So do we need to be very explicit on this? Bev, Billy?
Yeah, Tom, I think Brendan has alluded to it as well. I think it is a relevant factor that the task force will consider. In fact, there's already been some conversations about it in task force in working group meetings. I'm starting to think more and more we don't need it in the project proposal. I think it will come out in the wash as we go through the standard.
Okay, I see Imran, your hand up, but the implication is that people would be we could live without it in the project proposal, right? Okay, Imran, if we went ahead without it in the project proposal, would it address the issue you're trying to get in on?
Tom, thank you. I think that, to use Willie's words, this is relevant. I've raised other related issues when the circumstance arises. If there are those who'd like to have 29B remain in, perhaps there's a way to still get there by deleting the word "the report." So if 29B instead read the impact on the audit, if the majority of the audit had been completed when the auditor determines that the draft audit standard is not appropriate, and we stop at that point. So that will leave the door open to all of the considerations, including the risk management, ISQM, the report, everything else. Just delete the reference to the report and delete the last bit, and there's no transition back, etc. So the issue is there, it's fair, it has to be considered. What would happen?
Do people live with that? Josephine, since you were the initiator of this topic. Okay.
Tom, could you have the words repeated?
Okay. Imran, could you repeat it again?
So my proposal for a new 29B would be the impact on the audit. If the majority of the audit has been completed when the auditor determines that the draft audit standard is not appropriate.
Exploring the impact on the audit. If the majority of the audit, right? Is that what you were saying?
Yeah.
Okay. So in what circumstance, blah, 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 gets deleted. Exploring the impact on the audit. Okay, I think that works. It doesn't require any confirmation of a position of the board because we're only exploring, but it sets a marker that we have to address this issue. Okay, there were other topics that were raised in conjunction with this section. Kai, Bev, any reactions?
So I'll do the changes that we've just discussed. Eric, I'll find other words for give an idea. I see your point, but I don't think that should hold this up. We'll find something that's appropriate. It's just really to, I'm struggling to find the word on this call, but I will once we finish. So we'll get rid of those words and we'll put something appropriate in there. We'll add the footnote for CUSP for Rich. And then we will make this change in 29B that we've discussed, and we will also delete, oh no, that was the previous section. So I think those are the additional changes we'll make in this section. Moving on, just the rest of this section, I think there weren't any changes. I could have just dealt with those. So the changes are as you've seen them in the version that you got. On the impact analysis considerations, paragraph 36, I think this was a new paragraph. Well, it was sort of a paragraph that we made into 2 bullet points. There was a comment that the intro to the paragraph was a little bit clunky, which it probably was. And then, so I don't think that it changes the meaning of the paragraph with this new intro. Arising from that, I think was some changes that have come. Obviously, we needed to change some of the way that sort of the paragraphs go with the lead-in. I think, and there were a couple of other small changes in here by different people that I thought were good changes. So I'll just give you a minute to have a look at that. That's the main change here.
Isabel?
I struggled with the word negating in 36A, thereby negating the need for other jurisdictions to develop their own standards. So maybe it's my knowledge of English, but I would have expected another word like diminishing, removing, reducing, but negating seems strange to me.
We'll have to find another word because negating is a little bit stronger maybe than diminishing, because I don't think what we're trying to say here is we'd like other jurisdictions not to do it at all. Diminishing sort of seems to say that we don't mind if some do. So I'll find another word, Isabel, but we'll change the word negating.
Okay. So on those things where we're looking for a proper word, we're going to approve this with an understanding that a different word's going to go in. I'm not going to bring that word back to the board.
And Tom will clear these last couple of words through you and Billy, obviously before we finalize this. Implications for any specific persons or groups. Sorry, let me just have a look. Sorry, I'm just going back to the section. There was a comment that had come through on paragraph, just having a look, on paragraph 34, and paragraph 34, I think we'd had lots of comments actually on it, the original one. So we've really simplified it just to say that there will be an impact on education, training, and professional development. We've then added the comment at this point, because we actually don't really know what the standard is. It's hard to say what that is. A comment had come through to say, well, we need to perhaps have a little bit more about how we will consider this, but it's in the section on the impact analysis. So this is the impact on others. All we're saying here is listing out what the impacts will be on others, and it really will be for others to work out. So I think we're not going to make that change because it's not something necessarily for us. And then implications for any specific persons. There was nothing further other than what you've got. So are there any comments sort of for that whole section on the original ones that we sent through yesterday or the day before?
Okay, I don't see any comments, so I view that as support.
And then in addition to what we have sent out, we've made some tweaks in this section just on the project output. Instead of using in line, we're going to use the word consistent, probably better. And I think that was all the additional comments that we had. So anything else on the changes we've made to those last sections? We made no changes to the appendix.
Okay, I don't see any comments. Anyone else? Any other general thoughts before I ask for your approval with the changes that we've discussed and the 2 additional word changes to be reviewed by me and Billy? Okay, I guess I asked my parliamentarians. I think it's just a need for a simple vote on the project proposal as edited and revised and subject to the caveat I just said. So all those in favor of the LCE project proposal, raise their digital hands. Okay, hands down. I think we have a full majority. I raised my hand too. I'm pretty sure I didn't miss anyone. Sachiko, I see your hand up. Is that okay? No objections, right? Anyone wants to raise an objection? No. Okay, so congratulations to the working group and all your efforts to get the project proposal to that point. I think this is actually a milestone. People wondered whether we would actually really get going on this. Not only did we approve the proposal, but we made significant progress on the project itself at this meeting. So we are honoring our commitment. Bob, we're going to turn to you and hopefully approve the audit evidence project proposal.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. And I think everyone will be happy to hear. We were very pleased with the feedback that we got earlier in the week, and actually, and then subsequently the offline comments. Thank you for everyone who sent those to us. As we worked through it, the comments were not fatal flaw in nature or overly significant. So I think we will be able to move through this fairly quickly. My plan would be, Tom, we've just got one slide that kind of captures the edits that we've made to the document. Everyone would have seen the revised documents, revision marked that were sent the other night. And then after running through those, I plan to just hand back to you to take comments on the entire document. We don't plan on going section by section because the revisions just weren't that significant. If that'll work for everyone. So with that, if we could go to the next slide. We've captured here descriptions of the changes that we've made based on responses to the comments received during the plenary session as well as offline. So just walking through those, one thing we don't have here, but I would say we did make some changes to paragraphs 11, 16, and 25. Those were simply to changes that were made to the public interest paragraphs to be consistent with where we end up on the LCE project proposal that we just discussed. So those were just consistency changes. Paragraph 20, we made some changes to align that paragraph with paragraph 40, as was suggested by the board. And we also, a point was raised about whether there was any nuanced differences or intended differences between using the word data as opposed to information. That's an issue that's being discussed by the working group, so that is within the scope of what's being looked at. But there was no intention to differentiate between those in the context of the project proposal. So we've simply changed data to information in that paragraph, so it captures what was intended to be captured in that regard. Paragraph 21. In response to a comment, we modified that to add the words "to varying degrees" to indicate that not all auditors might be using technology. Paragraph 26, having to deal, this was in the project objectives and some views that they were too prescriptive. So with respect to sources of information, we made some changes to clarify or make the proposals more neutral, as was suggested, and emphasize that the proposed or the proposal regarding factors and attributes of information represents a principles-based approach that also might serve to address the scalability of the standards. So those were the revisions there, the sources of information. With respect to technology, we had a comment about future proofing and some words, and make sure we address that. We did add the term remains fit for purpose in that paragraph to address those comments, and clarifying that the changes in relation to technology are not intended to be prescriptive, but rather accommodate the use of technology. Paragraph 32, this had to do with the scope of the consequential amendments, and we had some discussion there. As is always the case, the staff, especially Willie and Jasper and Natalie and Phil, were very helpful in moving us through this and resolving it. So in paragraph 32, we added 2 sentences to clarify the scope of the changes that might result from relocating requirements from the extant standard to another standard, and clarified that in addition to relocating, the board might, or the board acknowledges that amendments may then also be needed to integrate those requirements into other IAASBs, and that there be flexibility to do so as consequential amendments. So spend a little bit of time trying to explain that concept better, and this is where we landed, and think it's a good good way to address the concerns which were valid. Paragraph 44, dealing with the work performed that's been performed or reflected in ISA 220. We added a paragraph to link the work on professional skepticism that already is in 220, and indicated that the board would explore whether and if so, how the material in ISA 220 revised might be drawn upon in this project. Paragraph 46, having to do with the coordination with other task forces and working groups, we We expanded that a bit and clarified that the Audit Evidence Task Force, at that point, of course, after the project proposal is approved, would consider the work specifically of the Technology Working Group in developing its revision size of 500. So we tried to make that a two-way working relationship with the Technology Working Group on this project. And then in paragraphs 48 and 49, also dealing with coordination, we added new and specific references that we would consider the work of the Fraud Working Group, the LCE Working Group, as well as the CUSP Working Group, and partly did some shifting around a little bit with paragraph 56 there. But Tom, that's a coverage of the revisions that we've made to the document. I hope everybody should have had time to have a good look at it. And with that, I just hand it back to you I think we can take comments on the entire project proposal, should there be any. So back to you.
Okay, sounds like you've been very responsive to the comments that you've received. Anyone want to ask any questions, raise any concerns? Isabel.
On Monday, I referred to paragraph 28 on the project scope, first bullet, and I commented under the wording more robust requirement. So I wanted to know if the task force was able to discuss that and why it was decided not to change it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Isabel. We did have a discussion around that. We looked at that, and the position of the working group was more robust indicates that the standard today is already robust. It doesn't mean that it's weak, which I think was your concern, if I remember specifically from Monday. And I know we talked about using some words like modernized rather than the robust thing, what we would do with the requirements. But when we were discussing that, we felt that just characterizing it as modernization of the requirements was probably too narrow. The project does involve more than that. And then kind of lastly, to just check ourselves, Jasper and Phil and Natalie did some looking back and determined that we had used those exact words in the project proposals for ISA 315 and 540, also that more robust construct with respect to requirements. So yes, we did consider the comment, but upon further reflection, we got to the point where we thought we were okay with the words that we had.
Okay, Isabel, I see you're nodding your head. I think you could accept at least the rationale there. Julie?
Well, I had a similar comment. Bob, you would have seen that in our comments the one comment we sent through was on paragraph 28. And I don't think I raised it in the same context that Isabel did the other day, but having now listened to the session that we had on what you're proposing in the issues paper, I wasn't sure that more robust requirements was the right term there. I think what I understand is we're going to modernize and revise the standards as a part of the project, but I still stumbled over the more robust, to be honest. So, so Tom, I guess I'm still struggling with that term to call it more robust.
Tom, I guess I'd ask if any other comments or thoughts around this.
Is anyone else really tripping up over this? Rich?
Yeah, so I unfortunately went past it, but I do understand the concern about more robust. I wonder if there's just another way to say what we're trying to do without having to use the word, more robust.
Improved? I don't know. So we bring up the thesaurus. Imran?
it's hard to imagine that one would do all of this and that the outcome would not be more robust, or in your words, Tom, improved.
Would improved work for you?
Yeah, it would work, yeah.
Tom, we did consider different words, including like strength. We thought about strengthen, but strengthen really would be worse, we thought, because that would indicate perhaps weakness with the existing construct. I think the biggest factor that we went back to was that these words, this construct, had been used previously in our project proposals, and I understand that's that precedent doesn't necessarily work in that mode. We did, just to have in our back pocket, if there was significant concern about this matter, we did develop or come up with an alternative to that first bullet in paragraph 28. I wonder if maybe I read that out and get reaction, if that would be appropriate.
Yes.
Okay. So for the first bullet in paragraph 28, we did come up with possibly using this sentence, and it would be just one sentence. Revise and modernize the requirements and application material of ISA 500 to achieve greater consistency in auditor judgments about audit evidence, as well as better explain the scope of the standard and its relationship with other standards, for example, ISA 200 and ISA 300 or 330.
I've just copied it into the chat box for everybody.
Thank you, Phil. So I know for the public record, they can't see the chat box, but
I guess I wonder about how specific it is. Like, could it be just use the word maybe revise and modernize to deal with the issue earlier? Just replace. Okay, part of me says that we're getting into way too much drafting for a public session of our board. Could we just do what we did on the last project proposal as it related to the couple of words that were highlighted and leave it to the team to find? But I think revised and modernized or something like it, use the word modernized rather than more robust, may be sufficient to solve the issue. Lily, you want to come in?
Tom, I just wanted to, and it's fine, we can take it away if the board is happy with that. I just wanted to make sure that if we decide to stick with more robust requirements and appropriate application material, also take into account some of the comments that were raised, would anybody see that as a fatal flaw? So if on reflection we decide that we want to just keep the wording as is anybody objecting to that?
Yeah, I guess no, but we could switch more robust to modernized as well, and that may be a sufficient replace. But either way, where we land, people will live with it. Okay, good, that's resolved. Any other issues we want to raise as relates to the project proposal? Okay, are we ready to vote on the project proposal with the amendments and based upon that one element? I think that's a yes. Okay, let me do it this other way. Does anyone want to reject the project proposal? Raise your hand. No. Okay, just for the record, raise your digital hands for approval of the project proposal. Okay. Just seeing if we're missing. Imran, are you on the other screen? Imran, are you supportive? Okay. We're in full unanimous support. I don't even know if there's an opportunity to abstain to a project proposal. That would be interesting, but we don't even need to confront that issue right now. So Bob, as one of your last acts as a board member, congratulations for getting the project proposal through and getting us well underway on the revision of the audit evidence standard. So thank you very much for that.
Yeah, thanks, Tom, and certainly again, just thanks to Eric and Jamie and Susan and Coyote and Wolf and Sue Almond and the crew, and especially Phil and Jasper and Natalie. It's in great hands handing this off to the task force now, and Sue will take up the reins and keep it moving forward. So thanks, everyone.
Okay, any other issues? That's the end of our formal agenda for today and for this week. Anyone want to raise anything before we turn to some few other items? Okay, I think everyone is really satisfied with the progress then. I want to ask Karen Southers whether she wants to add any perspective from the PIOB over this week's sessions. Thank you, Karen, for staying with us and observing and your input throughout.
Thank you. Thank you. I have to say it was a great week. A lot was accomplished, and your discussions were a demonstration of how dedicated and thorough you have taken on this work on the items. I think throughout I added some public interest ideas, and so there's nothing else to add except to wish everyone happy holidays. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. And just for the record, the board should know that I meet with the PIOB with Jim Dowkin and senior staff team and Stavros next week, and we will be discussing the public interest issues related to the work on PI definite enlisted entity definitions. We'll be talking about some of the public interest issues related to our going concern efforts, and of course, a general opportunity to report on our activities, including seeking the approval of the quality management standards. So that occurs next week. Jim Dowkin, any perspectives from your observation that you could offer related from the CAG?
Tom, I think we had the board had a very good discussion this week, and I appreciate that some of the or many of the comments that were reflected at the CAG level were also reflected at the board level. So thank you for that, and I wish everyone a great holiday.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you, and please wish our CAG colleagues a happy holidays on our behalf as well. So we're going to bring this to a close, but we have some things I want to raise beforehand. On an administrative front, remember the next IAASB meetings in public for Q1 of 2021. We have video conferences planned for January 26th, February 10th through 11th. And sadly, our normal quarterly plenary, we're planning on it to be virtual as well. And that's scheduled for March 15th through to 19th. Also, we've circulated video conference dates for the remainder of 2021. We're asking everyone to hold these in their calendars if you're continuing on with the IAASB. And then the CAG meeting for next year is March 8th, 9th, and 10th. A mixture of our board and IAASB. We'll confirm the exact dates and whether you're required to attend based upon the topics on the agenda. We do have an executive session on December 16th as well, which will be held virtually as well. Willy?
Thank you, Tom. Just on the teleconference or video conference dates for next year, you will remember that we have previously circulated that. And apart from the February meeting, the February call that was indicated for February 10 and 11, we did reserve that all the other dates which were all scheduled for Wednesday, that we may come back to you to also do use the Tuesday or the Thursday on either side of the Wednesday to make it also a 2-day call, depending on the needs. So what has transpired in the meantime is that we have taken a forward plan to the planning committee in November, and based on the discussions there, we will, before we close offices for the holidays, we will just send you the dates where we are going to use some of those dates, either the Tuesday or the Thursday, alongside the Wednesday that you should already have in your diaries as back-to-back calls for those sessions.
Any questions of Willy? Okay, I don't want to disappoint you, and I know I promised minutes approval. You have revised minutes for September 2020 and November 10th through 11th. Unless anyone objects, I propose that we approve both at the same time. Any comments on the minutes? I see no comments. Okay, anyone object to their approval? I see no objections. By a show of hands, could we get it? Everyone approve the minutes? Okay, let the record show that everyone is for their approval, and that's exciting stuff. Okay, just in terms of future board papers, just for the video conferences, of course, we'll still try to meet our deadline of 7 to 10 days prior to video conference. As it relates to the March meetings, we will likely begin posting on February 22nd, and all material should be posted by February 26th. Josephine, would you like to come in, or just your hands up? Okay, so now it's sort of a bittersweet moment, because sadly, this is the last public board session for 3 of our board members who've really done extraordinary things for this board over the last 6 years. So Rich, Bob, and Fiona. So we're really, this is hard to do by video, because we wish we were able to do this in person, and hopefully we'll have an opportunity to celebrate your service in person. I apologize for that. We're trying to replicate what we would do normally in person virtually, and you will have received a virtual card from everyone on the board and staff and those who've been worked with us closely over the years. One of the other things I should say is Arnold contacted me, and since he was your chair for most of your service, wanted to thank you for your extraordinary efforts on behalf of the board and to heighten the public interest role in audit standard setting. Let me sort of give my thoughts, some remarks on each, and then also turn it over to you to say some farewell remarks as well. Let me start with Rich, who, as you know, joined the board in 2015 and served for 6 years. I think we all know, and it has preceded my time, but one of Rich's big accomplishments was 540. He first started out as co-chair of the Financial Institutions Working Group that was established to focus on a number of audit issues relevant to financial institutions. That evolved to co-chairing the ISA 540 task force, which I think it's fair to say was a challenging project, Rich. And I'm not sure they told you what it would entail when you started it, but it was your relentless work with the task force and the staff team helped to ensure a successful result. And I don't think your work ever really ended on 540, because I know there was a ton of work related to implementation materials and outreach with groups such as the Basel and the IAAS that ensued. Rich was also very involved with the early work on quality control, leading up to the issuance in December 2015 of the invitation to comment on quality management group audits and professional skepticism. You continued as a member of the quality control working group, later shifting to the working group on engagement quality reviews, and was a member of the audit quality enhancements coordination group. That became the ISA 220 task force. So you can see the evolution of our thought right there. You played an active role in the early days of ISQM 1, 2, and ISA 220 that led to the efforts related to the invitation comment on these topics. You were a member of 600 task force and brought vital practical perspectives to the development of the ISA 600 exposure draft. You've been our point person in terms of liaison with the IAASB and chaired the liaison working group over the last year. I think it was reflected in our latest meeting with the IAASB of how much they've appreciated the way we've gone about our input to them. You've been an invaluable member of the steering committee now, planning committee in 2016, and just I've really appreciated getting to know you, work with you, and maybe the fact that the Dodgers won the World Series in your final year on the board is a symbol of what to celebrate in terms of your contribution. So thank you, Rich, for all you've done. I don't know if you'd like to say anything, Rich, or
yeah, maybe just a few words. I think I might save some of the more, I don't know, personal points till next week. But you know, this has been a great experience. I was so proud to be appointed. It really is a highlight of my career. And you know, the board and the members here, but the members that have been with me and the TAs over the 6 years, you know, it's really given me a close contact, personal relationships. I really like it. You know, 540 was, as you said, a big part of what I did, but I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the outreach that was there. You know, maybe just in closing, I just want to thank you for your counsel and advice, and definitely Arnold's counsel and advice over the years. Definitely like my TA Jamie. People know that he really supports me and therefore supports the board. I think I'm leaving you in good hands with Ado on. He'll do PwC proud in giving you comments that will help us move through quality going forward. So thanks for this.
Thank you, Rich. Bob, also a two-termer, and your departure from our board also marks a significant transition in your life too, as your day job transition from your role at the AICPA to the one as Chief Operating Officer of RSM International. my guess is that you could probably use the spare time now to help take on that role. Tough to be a chief operating officer, a new one at a time of pandemic. So we wish you all the best in that. Bob's been involved from the early outset on our work on quality management and group audits, being a member of the Audit Quality Enhancements Coordination Group and the Group Audit Working Group, which developed the invitation to comment on quality management group audits and professional skepticism in December 2015. Following the ITC, as you know, the groups evolved into several task force. Bob became a member of the ISQM1 task force and was a correspondent member for a large portion of that project, providing significant contributions that led to the eventual approval of ISQM1 in September. You've also continued as an active member of the ISA 600 task force, and we will very much miss you as we bring that project to completion. But your contributions will certainly be felt on that task force. You've been a pioneer in our technology efforts, being the chair of the Data Analytics Working Group. That became the Technology Working Group. With your leadership and insights, you oversaw the invitation to comment on the impact of technology and audit, which is really sort of helping to guide our future work in that area. You know, I also want to say that it was great that one of our last things that we did was the approval of the audit evidence project proposal and the work. You've really been an advocate of that project from the very start, rightfully so. You've chaired that working group since it initiated activities in 2019. You've been a proponent of innovation within our organization. You were a member of the Innovation Working Group. Not surprisingly, innovation is part of our core strategy now. As in your role with the AICPA, you also were an advocate of close relations with national standard setters, and that remains a priority. So thank you, Bob, for all you have done for the last 6 years.
Well, thanks, Tom, and similarly to Rich, I'll save many comments for next week in a different environment. I would say, on a serious note, I've always told anybody that will listen to me that the greatest privilege and honor of being a member of the IAASB is being around such committed and bright and smart people all the time. I truly believe it elevates the profession. It really is in the public interest, and I just admire everyone that I've been able to work with over the 6 years. So thank you to the IAASB for that, and the AICPA for supporting me in that. Also, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, I actually had 2 TAs. So for my first term, many of you remember, and she's still around, Ahava Goldman. And then more recently for my second term, Hiram has been my TA. They put up with me, they provide me with a lot of input and my sounding board, more or less. So I thank you for that. Also the staff, just nothing would happen without the staff. And I think after, when you get through 6 years, your appreciation for Tom, your team, Willie, and everybody that's involved is just one of absolute admiration and thankfulness for helping us through that. I do find it a bit ironic, and I don't think it probably speaks well of my capabilities, that it took me 6 years to get to the final meeting of my term to get the audit evidence project plan approved. But I'm very happy that it is, and I think there's a bit of an irony that actually my last official vote as a board member was to approve the minutes of a previous meeting. So what a high note to go out on. But thank you, and have more next week. Thanks, Tom.
Bob, you clearly hold minutes in the same high priority that I do. So it's great that we have this total meeting of the minds on that. Last but not least, Fiona, what are we going to do without you? First of all, for those who don't know, who forgot that Fiona got stuck with me midway in her first year as deputy chair. And, you know, I've just this last 18 months has been great. First of all, getting to know Fiona professionally and personally. She's really helped guide me through the first 18 months in my role, hopefully in a good way for you and your experience, and for you, Fiona, personally. I'm not going to read too much into it that for your final board meeting, you tried to escape to full quarantine away from me, but it didn't work. New Zealand quarantine gives you access to the internet, so poorly done on your behalf. But honestly, it really, I don't know if people know how much Fiona supports me, the staff, the board, and her responsibilities. As you know, Fiona served for 6 years on this board. She started out as a member of the data analytics working group and helped with the invitation to comment, had solicited input on the use of technology and the performance of audits. I'm pretty sure that Fiona would say that she's most proud of her role in leading the project on ISA 315, which may have been one of the most complex projects this board has completed. She probably was a little nervous that she had a new chair trying to usher that through in his first board meeting, but I think despite my efforts, it got through, which is a testament to Fiona's leadership and the work, her ability, and the task force's ability to fall behind her and tackle some of these really difficult issues. And I would think that ISA 315 is a little bit like her child in this regard, because she keeps on working on implementation of that project. And I think we're in pretty good place because of it in terms of implementation support materials. In 2017, you became a member of the steering committee, which now the planning committee, and as in almost all discussions we have, a really big contributor to that. You know, she could have just 315 being done, and then final 6 months of the role, she could have quietly gone off the sunset and taken it easy, a little bit what we call like senior spring when you're in college and everything is done. But for some reason, she decided to lead our fraud project efforts earlier this year. So thank you for that. And you've been really active in your engagement with our stakeholders and leading our recent roundtables on that project. So we're in really good shape. I think, Lynn, we're thrilled that you're going to be taking over that, but I think Fiona's left you a well-defined path on that front. Your outreach activities are significant. You've been to all parts of the world. I know probably the thing that you're most disappointed in this year is that you can't show us, well, you probably could, it would be a lot easier, the amount of miles you've traveled this year compared to last. I think you were somewhere at like 300,000 or something last year. And you did all of this while actually having a day job. So where you are a senior audit partner signing off on some of Australia's largest entities. So on behalf of the board, on behalf of me personally, Fiona, thank you. And you will be missed.
Thank you. Can I get the TAs and the staff to put their cameras on? Is that allowed? It'd be nice to see everyone's face. I'll just give you a few seconds so that we see all the cameras.
You're still deputy chair, so you have a lot of ability to make the rules.
For another 30 seconds. It's nice to see everybody's face. And thank you for the kind words, Tom. I'm sure next week will be equally as kind, not. It has been an amazing journey over the past 6 years. As you said, thousands of miles flown, thousands of hours spent, being intellectually challenged by some of the smartest people I've ever had the pleasure of working with, and of course, a little bit of fun along the way. Before I joined, Dan Montgomery had a handover call with me, and I found my notes from that call recently. And on the call, he mentioned that I could also be the deputy chair at some stage. And in the margin, I noticed 3 little letters that I had written next to that. And I'm sure you can all guess what those letters were. It started with a W. But clearly, it turns out Dan was a wise man, because he could tell years in advance that that was going to be an opportunity that I would be given, which I'm incredibly grateful for. At my first ever board meeting, the technical director at the time explained to me that I was lucky to have Denise as my TA, because Denise could make a tree stump look good. Now, I wasn't sure if she was implying I was dumb as a tree stump or not, but in hindsight, her words were profoundly accurate. I couldn't have made anywhere near the contribution I have made over the past 6 years without Denise. So she's on a second screen. I can see Denise. I have no doubt, Diane, you will also benefit greatly from having Denise's support. So thank you, Denise. To the staff who work tirelessly to make all of us look good, thank you. Of course, my projects have meant that I've had the pleasure of working with a number of staff, most of whom quit after working with me. So to Bev, congratulations. You are truly made of tough stuff. You should feel incredibly proud of the way you managed to help us all navigate the pitfalls that you've seen many times before over your career. And I'm super impressed that despite probably thinking it, you never actually said to me, "I told you so." So thank you, Bev, and to all the staff. I'm sure next week there's going to be way more stories that come out. And reflecting on probably the impact I may have had over those 6 years, I hope the dress ups and the stories have brought a bit of fun and enjoyment to our meetings, while definitely not trying to detract from the serious work that we're actually doing. A definite highlight, Tom, was ISA 315 and the great friends I've made on that journey. I suspect nobody in a task force meeting will look at a flip chart quite the same again. And I'm hoping that everybody's blood sugar levels from my 315 days has now returned to normal. No longer sweets and candies and treats in the meeting room. I will miss our taste tests, of course, although, Chun-Wei, I will just say those fish egg flavoured snacks you so graciously delivered to us in Singapore were truly awful. I have made lifelong friends, and I do consider myself to have gained a lot, and a lot more out of my time than what I think I put into it. Thank you to Arnold, obviously. I survived my interview with him and he let me get appointed, which was, or put forward at least for appointment. And also Tom, for you, willing to let me continue as your deputy. I had very big shoes to fill, with Dan obviously being a deputy, and then Chuck and then Megan, and they led the way for me. And I'm sure, Len, you will do a great job as well. I've really enjoyed the time that we've been able to work together, Tom. I've learned a lot, so thank you. I am looking forward to the Zoom farewell next week. So probably a little more than maybe what Rich is looking forward to the Zoom farewell next week. I do recall very early in my time on the board that someone at a farewell saying that the world of standard setting is very small and you never truly escape it. And at the time, I thought that was a bit mean. It's a bit of a mean thing to say to someone who's probably about to retire. It must have been at the December farewells in my first year. I do understand now that that is in fact a blessing if it happens, and I feel privileged. Thank you.
Thank you, Fiona. As someone who began their standard setting journey 20 years ago, I could tell you that is probably very much true. So I am certain this will not be your last touch to the standard setting world these days. Well, thank you very much. I said we'll have more opportunity to acknowledge and celebrate all 3 of your accomplishments and contributions. It's a big undertaking. I'd like to close the sessions, first of all, by thanking the staff and the TAs for all that they do on behalf of the board. It's been a really challenging year for everyone in the context of what's happening in this world. For the TAs, I know just like board members, you have day jobs. You also don't always get the benefit of the exposure that you merit, but we know how much work you put into this board's success and how committed you are to doing the right thing and getting everyone prepared and input. And so thank you to the TAs as well. The staff, same, you've managed to adjust and adapt to this environment while managing the challenges of a home environment as well. And the fact that we've been able to keep going as a board and make so much progress this year. Just think about all the things we've gotten out the door, whether it's 600 ED or the QM standard, or a full working draft of an LCE standard, or approval of project proposals on audit evidence at LCE. And what has become a transformation of the board's work plan. That's down to you. And I appreciate it. In particular, I wanted to thank the leadership team, Billy and Bev and Brett and James for all that they do to support me. Not sure people know this, but I speak to them regularly throughout the day and rely upon them for their counsel. And of course, the board members, without which we could not do anything. And I'm truly thankful for all you've done this year for us, for the board, for the public interest. I think I've noticed, I really do feel like we're a collegial board, willing to roll up our sleeves, don't take things personally. And we certainly miss having each other's company in person. And I long for 2021 when we can meet in person, hopefully sooner rather than later. But the most important thing is that you're all healthy and well right now and willing to still be part of this journey with us. So thank you. And so with that, I bring the meeting to close and wish you and all of our observers a happy and healthy holidays. And for our board and staff, we'll do executive session next week. But for the record, thank you for everyone who contributes to this process. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Happy holiday. See you next week.
Holiday. See you next week.
Happy holidays.